I think part of the project of modern history and part of what a lot of social historians have done is to recognize, as the Tenement Museum does, that in order to tell the story of this country, you can't only tell the story through the perspective of the presidents and the kings. Part of what it means to tell the story of history is to also tell the story of ordinary people. People who lived in tenements and drove carriages and cleaned people's shoes. Their stories tell us as much, if not more, about what this country is than hearing it from the perspective of high-seated people.
I teach 9th and 10th grade English at Roosevelt High School here in Minneapolis. Having ICE come to our doorstep 2 days after getting back from winter break was not something that we were prepared for. There's a lot of trauma, there's a lot of grief, there's a lot of thinking as a teaching staff, how do we even process this? Last summer, I was so lucky to attend the Tenement Museum's Summer Teacher Institute. I reflected back on my experiences from the summer and really thought about, okay, this is a moment where everything that we talked about that week is suddenly applicable in a whole new way. Your Story, Our Story, and the tenement curriculum was a natural next step for helping my students process their experience.
My text is called the Sabayad, a Somali flatbread that carries the weight of history in its thin, golden layers.
My great-great-grandfather was born in the Bergen Fjord of Norway. Generations later, but the chest is still here. It's a beacon of a different time and the American dream.
In Afghan hamak, patterns and colors show culture, tradition, and where people come from. Many designs are passed down from families and hold memories of home.
My object is called Tasbih. It's more than beat and strength. It's a connection to past, my family, and the prayers that keep us together no matter where we are.
Everybody wrote their own stories about objects connected to immigration, migration, cultural identity. It was really powerful for them to connect with other people and say, we have this, and this in common, and our objects that we chose are actually kind of similar even though they come from different continents.
My object is bryndzové halushki. This last summer, my puppy taught me how to make it for the first time.
Whenever I see sambusas during Ramadan, I feel connected to something bigger, a tradition woven through family, faith, and the simple joy of gathering after a long day of fasting.
My students all have different backgrounds, they all have different stories. I'm so lucky to have the Tenement Museum as this outside resource that has helped me think about how do I be a really effective teacher in 2026, in this moment in my city and in the world. History is messy and things can feel really bleak sometimes, and yet you find a way through because you have to. That's the story of the Tenement Museum, but it's also the story of my Minneapolis students.
Good evening. Good evening. This is the time to stop chatting and pay attention to the content of the program. It's a delight to welcome you to the Tenement Museum's Gala, Windows onto the American Story. And I know that in the audience tonight are people that have come from all over the country. I want to thank first teachers who are up there. Kristen Cruz from North Carolina. Mike Agavino from Queens. And Mike is here with 15 of his students from Gateway School in Jamaica, Queens. also have with us one of the stars of the video that you just saw, Rebecca Oberg from Minneapolis, Roosevelt High School. And there are people from Colorado and California, Maryland, DC, people both from Maryland and DC. The DC people, I have not put you in Maryland or vice versa. People from Louisiana, all over the country, and also let's face it, even those of us who are in Manhattan made a bit of a migration over 11th Avenue to get to City Winery. So I thank you all for being here because this is poised to be one of the most successful galas the Tenement Museum has had in its history, and I want to thank you for making it that way, and I want to thank you for being here, not just today, but so many days of the year to see us do the work that we do. We're honoring tonight several people. One of them is Clint Smith. And I'm going to repeat something he said because my guess is some of you were still finding your way to the tables or having a last chat. But when that video opened, you have Clint talking to the teachers at a National Teacher Institute that we had last summer, telling them about social history. That social history is the history of everyday people. This concept that we can learn about history not just through presidents and kings, but also through the perspectives of tailors, of coaches, of coach drivers, of waiters, of people who did ordinary work and never expected to be remembered and never expected certainly to be the subject of museum exhibitions. But that's what we do at the Tenement Museum. We take the lives of ordinary people and we make them windows onto American history. You think you're learning about a Jewish family, but you're also learning about the garment industry. You think you're learning about a black family living in a tenement, but you're also learning about the Civil War, and so on and so forth. All of our stories, all of our family stories are chapters in the American story, and they're chapters that are accessible. But this work is not easy. It's much easier, as you can imagine, to tell the stories of famous people. Famous people leave records, they're photographed. What do we do with the people who never thought they would be remembered and weren't maybe considered important in their lifetime? And so at the Tenement Museum, we not only tell the stories of everyday people, we research their stories. And I want to just give you one quick example about some research I just learned of last week. We have here tonight in our audience the wonderful researcher, a PhD student at Northwestern, but who's with us at the Tenement Museum, Marquise Taylor. And last week, I was privileged enough to sit in a classroom with him as he was teaching our educators. Our educators are those who lead our tours of the Tenement Museum. And he was sharing with them new research he had found about the latest family whose story we tell, Joseph and Rachel Moore, a black couple who lived in the tenements in the 1860s. And what's so great about the Tenement Museum is when you come, how many of you have been on a tour before? Okay, excellent, excellent. How many of you have been on every tour we do? So there's reason to come back. But what happens on the tours is you might ask a question, and the educator strives to answer that question. But sometimes, if you've asked a really, really good question, and we don't know the answer, we go back and research. And one of the questions that was coming up in telling Joseph and Rachel Moore stories, how did Rachel Moore come to New York City? She was born upstate. Some of you live upstate, and you know it's much prettier than New York City often. Why did she come? As a woman barely 20 years old, why did she come to New York? And Marquise went to research this question, and it brought him to a local archive upstate. And he found this amazing ledger. And the ledger was of a man named Lefebvre, which was her last name. Her maiden name was Rachel Lefebvre. But her father had been enslaved, and he was enslaved to another man whose name was Lefebvre, and that's how they got the name. And he found a ledger book. It's hard to read, so I will give you the gist of it. That in 1840, when Rachel was 12 years old, and again, this is after slavery has been abolished in New York State, when she's 12 years old, she worked for 3 weeks for this man, Moses Lefebvre, shucking corn, doing other agricultural work, and 6 weeks of work was paid $3. So that's 50 cents a week. And I know that money is different at different times, but it's 50 cents a week is never good. And it gives you a sense of why this woman, 20 years old, travels to New York City, because in New York City, again, which has disease and corruption and is crowded and yes, is expensive, but in New York, she would not have to work for someone who had enslaved her family. And in New York, she could make $7 to $10 as a laundress. And again, a laundress isn't the best job in the world, but she had control over her time and what she did in a way that she would not have had upstate. Marquise also learned that Rachel had 2 cousins that she grew up with, first cousins, and found out that those 2 cousins would go on to serve in a colored regiment in the Union Army. And then that gives this so much more. When we see this picture, and this is of people going to see this regiment off at Union Square in 1864, Rachel might have been there. And what would she have thought about? What would she be thinking in that? And you can imagine that when we shared all of this information and information like it with teachers who came on the Teachers Institute, they began to imagine how their own students, who are 12 years old, 13 years old, 14 years old, how they would imagine what life was like. And now you start to see the impact that everyday stories and these details, what they do for history and what they do for students. And these teachers who came, again, 44 teachers from 39 different states, they came to New York, they came to the Tenement Museum, they went on all of our tours, they met with leading historians, some of whom are in the room tonight, they met with Clint Smith, and then they went back and they did Your Story, Our Story. They had their own students research their own stories. Because when you learn that ordinary history is important and the history of everyday people are important, then that activates you to understand that your own life is important and that of your family. And so they've been collecting these stories, and perhaps, as you saw in the video, the most dramatic kind of element of this, showing the emotional and the historical impact of this, was when students in Rebecca Oberg's class at Roosevelt High School one day had ICE show up at the door, and 2 visions of American identity clashed right outside their schoolroom. One vision was exclusionary, it separated families. One vision was inclusive, and it held up the sacredness of the family. And that clash then had ripples throughout Minneapolis, as you know, and these students went to study at home. They were hybrid. It was a hybrid thing, and students who needed to be at home for safety were at home. And Rebecca Oberg had to figure out, how do you teach students who are dispersed? Some are in your classroom, and most are dispersed throughout the neighborhood. And so she did Your Story, Our Story. And through that, through her teaching of that, brought the students together to understand their own histories and also what they have in common with one another and the resilience it gave them. And I want to just quote one student's story, and then I will move on because Dan Nardello told me not to talk too long. But this is important. I want you to hear what the student said. She wrote about a Somalian flatbread. Her grandmother had come from Somalia, and she talked about, the student understood that history was complicated. She said that the bread's thin golden layers carry the weight of history, but that weight also allows for comfort and for resilience. She also wrote, when I tasted it, it felt warm and comforting, like being wrapped in a story older than me. She also wrote, this object teaches me that culture does not disappear, it adapts, it survives, and lives on through what we make and share. I couldn't have said anything better about Your Story, Our Story than this student did, and the students who are upstairs today. And so I want to thank those students, I want to thank those teachers, and I also want to thank tonight for making this gala happen, our amazing co-chairs, Michelle Merman, And in just a little bit, you'll experience Michelle Merman's passion and intellect for her connection to the Tenement Museum as she comes up to help make this the most successful gala ever in Tenement Museum history. And then I also want to thank Meryl Ziegar, our other co-chair, for always believing that the Tenement Gala should be mission and content focused. I also want to thank our entire board of trustees. I have 30 bosses, and they are amazing, 2 of whom have become grandparents in the last week or so. So again, a special congratulations to them. And I want to call out the work of our board co-chairs, Alice Yerk, one of the new grandmothers, and Peter Levin. They do not always love attention, but I'm gonna just bear with me, I'm sorry. Peter and Alice do reviews of me every year, and what they do is they interview other trustees and they interview the staff, and they come with a full report and with quotes. So I decided I would ask my colleagues what they had to say about them. Anna, you understand what I'm doing here. This is just some, first of all, they noted that they come to so many programs, and then not only do they come to the programs and the member events, they write detailed thank you letters afterwards. They were described as, quote, inquisitive in the best of ways, observant and caring, engaged in our mission and staff, fully invested, thoughtful, and interested in everyone's comments and perspectives. There's more, but I'll just stop there because Peter is looking very, very humbled. I will say also, I asked my colleagues this on a Saturday morning thinking they'd respond Monday, but they responded Saturday morning. And so again, a tribute to the enthusiasm that they have for Peter and Alice and the entire board. And I know now that in my next review, I'll be told to use schedule send. And thanks to each and every one of you, our sponsors and supporters, for your generosity and support. And now we move on to our Founders Award, our first honoree. In 2008, Morris J. Vogel took the reins from founder Ruth Abram and led the museum through 2017. Under his leadership, the museum's campus expanded to incorporate a second tenement at 103 Orchard, where the museum created post-1945 exhibits on the Epstein, Saez Velezes, and Wongs families that in turn extended the museum's scope to over a century. To collect stories beyond our walls, the museum launched Your Story, Our Story, an online archive of stories that has now grown to include over 20,000 contributions from across the nation. Morris also returned in 2019 for a year, and you see where this is going. He returned to be interim president, not knowing, thank goodness he didn't know this would happen, because I think he wouldn't have done it, or I bet he still would have done it, but the pandemic hit, and Morris had to come in and figure out how to right the ship and how to help, and indeed to help save the museum at a critical juncture. Morris is trained as a historian at the University of Chicago, and he very, very rarely talks about his own family and his own story, at least very rarely did that at work, because I think he thought that as a historian, his job was to lift up everyone else's story. So tonight, we created a story for him about his family. He helped us do it. You're gonna see a short video that tells the story of a wicker basket that traveled from his birthplace in Kazakhstan to Poland, Germany, New York, and Connecticut. It shows how he and his parents escaped war-torn Europe to create an American home. Fittingly, that home was located very near the intersection of Grant Street and Asylum Street. Grant Asylum. We're excited to share that story, an important window onto the American story in its own right, as we honor Morris with the Founders Award for helping to build and then to return to save the Tenement Museum.
This wicker basket is about persecution, flight, hope, and renewal. My parents, Samuel and Ruth Vogel, bought it in Jambul, Kazakhstan, where they met and married in 1944. They had separately fled the German invasion of Poland in 1939, traveling eastward into the Soviet Union, through whose open borders more than 1 million Jews found refuge from Nazi brutality. For my story, I picked a woven straw basket, this size by this size by this size. And we had used it when our children, who are now 50 and 47, were growing up as a toy chest. My parents bought this basket and filled it with these woven coats, which he would then sell. It went to Poland. It went to a DP camp in Germany. No one wanted the coats, which they threw out, but they kept the basket. I confess that for someone who became a historian, I knew very little about my own history. I have no memories of Kazakhstan. I left before I was half a year old. What America was for my parents was a place that they built new lives. I lived in a community of refugees and survivors in Norwich, Connecticut, where people didn't talk about struggle in the past. It was Passover Seders. It was the rituals of Jewish life that they brought with them. That was the story that they shared with our kids. For them, our family story was being with my parents. I'm touched always by coming into these spaces. We get to think about who we are in a place like this. We get to share that with our kids and our grandkids. Everyone should have the opportunity to reflect on and to think about those parts of their background that give themselves insight into who they are and share with others the sense of where they come from. That's one of the things that makes the museum so special today, that it's the leading edge of a movement to think about America in this much more inclusive way. It was a privilege to be part of an institution that's so central to how we, at our best, understand who we are and what we're becoming.
Thank you. I would never disagree with Annie Polland, who's been the most brilliant successor imaginable. But the phrase ordinary people really doesn't apply to the folks whose stories we tell. They are the most extraordinary people. They are the people who brought us to where we are. I want to particularly thank also the board leadership who embraced our vision of a museum that could tell more immigrant stories to more visitors. Bruce Menon, Alan Weiler, Scott Metzner, Merrill Zegar, they knew it was essential that we do more than promote tolerance of immigrants, the museum's original and still very vital mission. Tolerance, important as everyday events remind us, tolerance is baseline. It's minimal. It's ungenerous. It means not knocking someone off a sidewalk if they're different. It means allowing outsiders to breathe the same air that we breathe. It means assuring that one system of justice protects us all. Critical as tolerance is, we knew that we could and that we should do more. We could center America's immigrant experience. We as a people, after all, we contain multitudes. It's as an immigrant nation that we expanded our economy, that we democratized our government and our society, that we developed our culture, that we embraced our identity, and that we found our place as a people in the world. The stories that the museum tells, whether they're of the Baltizis struggling through the Great Depression, the Schneiders, whose lager beer saloon helped define their Kleindeutschland community, Natalie Gumpertz raising 3 daughters alone as she eked out a living in the garment trades, Joseph and Bridget Moore building an American family in New York after fleeing Ireland's potato famine, the Levines sharing their tenement home with a sweatshop, Rachel and Joseph Moore, part of the mid-19th century Southern migration that made New York City the country's largest free black community. That the Rogoshevskys, struggling to maintain their old world faith, Regina and Kalman Epstein, rebuilding their lives on the Lower East Side after the carnage of the Holocaust, the Chinese Wongs, the Puerto Rican Saezes, the Sephardic Confinos. These are America's most important stories. These stories, these equal the founding narratives of the Mayflower, of the Virginia planters, who were, when some of us, those of us with graying hair or none at all, when we went through school, those were the stories we were told were America's story. Those were the ideals to which we were taught that we needed to conform, that we needed to idealize. The museum's power and its uniqueness lie in its expression of America's founding narratives and their highest values through the details of the immigrant lives, of people making homes in difficult and often strange environments, raising families, educating their children, earning livelihoods, struggling with injustice, practicing their faith, coming to terms with elements of their earlier lives, and running through all of our stories, running through every one of our stories, investing their dreams for their children into this land of hope and dreams. Those stories, those dreams, those values are more important today than ever before. Those values are at the core of my being. Please bear with me for a moment as I thank the family, the friends, the colleagues who've been my guides, my parents whose love meant that they sheltered me from their stories. The grandparents, the aunts, the uncles, the cousins I never knew, but in whose light I know I live. Ruth, who in lending me her Jansen more than 60 years ago, introduced me to the world of museums and the power of the culture. Our sons, Ken, who this week was part of the New York Times team that won the Pulitzer Prize for investigative reporting, and our rock star academic economist, John. Our wonderful daughters, Danielle and Jacqueline, who've joined us, and our LA preteens who we hope will be able, David and Matthew, who we hope will be able to build on America's best hopes. Thanks especially to Annie, who made the museum's hopes and dreams her own. And thank you, everyone in this room, for supporting, I will finish, this wonderful museum. Thank you. It really is not ordinary.
Many times I've heard friends say, I wish I had asked my parents. I wish I knew more about my mother. I'm so sorry I never asked this. I've heard this a million times. I'm glad that in our family, nobody will have to ask that question. They will know everything, and maybe more than they want to know. You get closer to the truth of a story if you get multiple voices telling that story. That's what I did as an oral historian of an organization, be it the Salvation Army, be it UJ Federation. No one voice told the story of those organizations. That was my life for over 20 plus years. So taking it to the house, to home, was not such a big leap for me.
The beauty of the way Ima tells stories is the fact that we continue to grow into them. Our entire lives, she's been trying to tell us stories about ourselves and about people that we should know about. I think I speak for all of us, right? I could say, like, we've passed that down. Like, I make books for everything now. The storytelling journey started for us at a young age, and she made us feel like not only the main characters, but also potential storytellers, too.
With Ima keeping these stories alive, I think what I'm realizing and what Ima's giving me is also a source of pride.
The faintest ink is more powerful than the strongest memory. I love that and try to document as much as I can, and I think that when I think of Ima, she's the same way. That you don't need fame or notoriety to have your story documented and have it ladder up to a bigger picture. I see that here at the Tenement Museum, and I see that in all of the work that she's done as well.
Our family understands that many voices make a whole story. It's very clear why everyone is so excited to be working with the Tenement Museum, because it is the quintessential multiple stories telling the story of the country's history, of New York's history, and why so many of us feel that it is the singular place to come if you want to know New York's beginnings.
It's very much overlaying the personal history and the history of families and what they were going through on a day-to-day with kind of what you read about in the headlines and what was happening in the news. And keeping that front and center and personalizing it just leads to just a much richer history and a much richer text than how we typically learned about this in high school.
That's true.
The idea that every family has a story, every family adds to the rich fabric of this country's history, I think is one of the best ideas to come out of the Tenement Museum.
I am so happy to be here. I'm honored that I'm here in my role as the rabbi for Morris Vogel and Nicki Tanner. So that is one of my great privileges in life. On this night of stories, I actually wanted to start with a story from Jewish tradition about one of our most important storytellers. He was the 18th century Rabbi Jacob Krantz. He was so gifted that Moses Mendelssohn called him the Jewish Aesop. And our tradition gave him the title of Maggid, the Maggid of Dubno. Maggid meaning teacher, storyteller. Now, the Maggid helped people understand the world from stories that he drew from real life, of merchants and beggars, villagers and children, families and fools. And when someone asked him why he always taught Torah through stories, the Maggid answered, true to form, by telling a story. He said, truth walked through the world naked and cold. Wherever truth went, doors were slammed in his face. People turned away, refusing to let truth in. One day, story found truth shivering cold outside by the roadside. And story dressed truth in his cloak, in beautiful clothes, colorful, warm, and inviting. And from that day on, wherever story and truth walked together, they were welcomed everywhere. The Maggid understood that stories were instruments of truth, giving truth shape, form, and color. Stories bring us truth in a way that we can take in, that are emotional and human and memorable. Tonight, we are celebrating one of our generation's greatest storytellers, the Maggid, Nicki Tanner. Nicki has been telling stories her entire life, but even more, she has been lifting up the stories of others, whether they are unsung women heroes, early American Jewish pioneers, or that of her husband and family members. Through these stories, she has helped us see truths about our aspirations and our failures as a community and as a nation. With her innate curiosity and warmth and humility, Nicki is able to draw stories out from all of us. She always makes us feel seen and significant. I'm so honored to play a small role in celebrating your story tonight, Nicki, and it is, of course, fitting that Nicki is being honored by the Tenement Museum, which has made storytelling its educational medium. This museum clothes the truth of immigrant lives so that their risks and resilience, their contributions and courage are not turned away or forgotten. The truth is, we are a nation of immigrants. And even when people do not always want to acknowledge that story, we know the truth. So what an honor to be here today, to be part of the story that we are all writing about our country. And let us all be storytellers for the truths we need to hear now, the truths of dignity, memory, and belonging. We welcome our Maggid, Nicki Tanner.
Thank you, Angela, for your flattering introduction. Just working? And thank you for being one of our family's guiding stars for over 20 years. And thank you, wonderful family, of whom much has been asked these past few months, as you could see, and much given. And thanks to my friends for your love and support, and to you, Annie, and your dedicated board and staff for bringing the Tenement Museum to this point of great strength. The limelight is not my favorite spot, but I agreed for two reasons. One, I don't say no to Annie, and two, because I believe wholeheartedly in the power of storytelling and in the significance of the national project that we're talking about tonight, the Your Story, Our Story project. I think we've been helped to try to understand, being a young or not so young person and being asked to look around your home and choose an object in your home that has special meaning for you. Imagine the conversations that would follow from this, about your family migration story, about your holidays, your customs. Imagine the joys of discovery and the moments of pride. Thanks to this project, these conversations are being held around the country at thousands of tables. Go online and you'll see a picture of the Sanyo rice cooker that was part of a Philippine grandson's upbringing, or a blue 18-wheeler truck that represented what Angel Arriaga's dad went through to help his Honduran family, or how food, pasta especially, connected Gabrielle to her great-grandparents' childhood in Sicily. Angel, Gabrielle, and the others are not celebrities, but I believe their stories are as interesting and important as those you read in People magazine, perhaps more so. All has been revealed about how partial I am to family stories. Our family has a truckload of them in various homes, now scattered throughout, consciously or unconsciously aimed at our descendants, connecting future family members to their shared past and enabling them, I hope, to better understand the present. I have no doubt about the value of this work. Consider the Chinese proverb, to forget one's ancestors is to be a brook without a source, a tree without a root. Or from Clint Smith's wonderful book, How the Word is Passed. So much of the story we tell about history is the story that we tell about ourselves, about our mothers and our fathers, about their mothers and their fathers, and stories that become embedded in our identities in ways we are not fully cognizant of. One last quote, this one from Alan Lomax, a musician, a folklorist, an archivist, a political activist, an oral historian, my kind of guy. He wrote, "The essence of America lies not in the headlined heroes, but in the everyday folks who live and die unknown, yet leave their dreams as legacies." Which brings us back to the Tenement Museum and its special work. We are in a perilous time, a time when a great effort is being made to erase history, to deny our past, and the roles that our antecedents played in it. The work being done here, shining a warm and generous light on the world and telling with moral certainty stories that connect and divide. No, stories that connect across diverse communities helps us to understand the deeply American and deeply beautiful mosaic of our collective experiences. I am proud to serve as a megaphone tonight for the Tenement Museum and the YSOS, Your Story, Our Story project, and I thank you for giving me this opportunity to do so.
Once you teach young people American history, and once you teach them about all of American history, it allows them to look at the world around them today and make sense of it with a lot more clarity.
So now we're in Bella and her sister's bedroom. I'm sure a lot of you have seen these before, but this is a vinyl record, and that they would buy these 45s.
I'm so young and you're so old. This night, darling, I've been told.
That was the song. It was played more in my house than I think anywhere else in the world. That was it. That made me an American.
I found it really interesting how she said, like, because she listened to this, it made her American. And it showcases, like, how music can create community and connections and, like, create a sense of belonging for some people.
I've been coming to the Tenement Museum since I was really young, going on all the different tours,
And now being an educator here in New York City, I saw an advertisement for the Teacher Institute. So I really wanted to apply. I saw all the historians that would be involved in the program, Leslie Harris, Mainai. I really wanted to get that opportunity to mingle with different educators, but also let the Tenement Museum be the epicenter of it all.
So when I think about the amazing week that I had there learning with other teachers from all over the country, I can start to see the parallels and the power that you have for teachers all over the country.
I've taught American history for 15 years, and so when I found the Tenement Museum, I got really, really excited. I just kind of thought it was this perfect opportunity to learn about immigrant history and then bring that back to my students. So we are in Hofftown, North Carolina, just outside of Winston-Salem. Reagan has about 2,500 students, and I primarily teach AP US history students. For me, I think it was really important to stand in those rooms, and then thankfully my students were able to experience that even virtually.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Tenement Museum, and today we're going to get to know a family called the Rogoshevskys.
It wasn't the photos of Jacob Riis, it was, these loving families that were working hard, and that resonated with them, especially in understanding American identity and the American story, like being able to kind of make those connections between even like their lives today.
Prior to coming into high school, I think many students have an idea that history is a textbook, history is something in the archives, and history is something that you read about, memorize, and move on with your life. Your story, our story, showcases to students that they are historical, that everything around them has a history to it. Even that simple object in your grandmother's kitchen, that object in the bedroom matters, and there's a history behind it, there is a story behind it. I think the kids started to realize, wow, I belong to this history. I am a historical being.
The teenagers in this classroom are doing exactly what Clint Smith writes about, being everyday people, taking history into their own hands and not letting the most powerful, loudest voices be the only voices that are heard. What you're creating is not just for your teacher anymore, you're creating historical documents for this moment in time.
My goal as a teacher is to teach kids how to think critically, but also as a social studies teacher, it's to teach empathy.
It's like all the different cultures like we see today, all the religions we see today, and all the different like nationalities we see today are all created from our stories, which all make up the bigger picture of the American story.
Through this, it really stood out to me that like being proud of, not only as an American, is being proud of like each of your heritage, like where you all came from, because that's what builds like the real American spirit. It's like being proud of each where every person came from.
A lot of people that came as immigrants, they only had their own like family to look up to, but like when you're reading other people's artifacts showing that like, okay, somebody from an Indo-Caribbean background has the same experiences as I do, I can relate with them, maybe like befriend them, and we can share our experiences, and then I won't be so alone on this topic.
I feel like as first-generation immigrants, it's really hard to find your sense of belonging, but seeing other people who may face the same obstacles that you're facing helps you persevere in life and gives people hope.
Hope is work. Hope is proactive. Hope is not passive. And you have to do your part in order to instill hope within yourself and instill hope within others.
It reinforces the idea that as Americans, we need to keep marching forward. I think the Tenement Museum, your story, our story, the Teacher Institute, the underlying foundation for me is hope. So my hope for the program is to get more teachers involved across the nation, get more students involved.
I will do your story, our story, every year from now on. There's no doubt about it.
It's really been transformational for my teaching this year.
A lot of school projects I do just for a grade, but Your Story, Our Story was so much different. Your Story, Our Story gave me a place where no matter how much I feel like I didn't fit into Czech or American culture, my story was my culture. I think being a child of an immigrant in America is hard because you don't fit into either cultures. Your Story, Our Story gave me a space of my own. I would like to thank you for that, and I am sure so many people feel the same.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Michelle Merman, a co-chair of this fabulous gala, along with Meryl Snow Zagar, and I welcome all of you. Congratulations, of course, to Morris, Nicki, Clint, and to Annie for running a marvelous institution, our Tenement Museum. We are delighted to welcome you here tonight to Windows onto the American Story. I have been inspired by the many beautiful stories in Your Story, Our Story. And I'd like to share with you one of my own personal stories. When I was 5 years old, my best friend Gail, who lived just a few doors away from me in Brooklyn, ran over to my house 3 times, each time carefully bringing a different ceramic animal. First a sheep, then a poodle, and finally a Scotty. They were my birthday present. The animals, which I still have more than half a century later, actually more than half a century later, came from Finkelstein's & Sons, Gail's parents' store at 95 Delancey Street at the corner of Ludlow on the Lower East Side. The store imported the most fantastic things from all over the world. And these are an example. When we were older, Sundays meant hanging out with Gail at the store. Alice had Wonderland, Gail and I had the Lower East Side, and we were allowed to wander it. Imagine visiting an entire store, floor to ceiling, in candy. How about a store with only giant bins of feathers? We laugh, but those filled the pillows and comforters that our parents and grandparents used. An underwear store with 3-cup bras. I can't tell you how fascinating that was for an 8-year-old. Stores packed so deep in clothes or shoes or hats or notions, the workers used giant teetering wooden ladders to get to the boxes piled precariously one on top of the other. Endless wonders for us, and I know for the huge numbers of Americans throughout the Lower East Side. When I walk into the Tenement Museum, I walk through the looking glass. I live what life was like, and I can connect my own personal story to the history I share with so many Americans. The museum is indeed a springboard to understanding our people and our struggles. Your Story, Our Story helps thousands of teachers across New York and the country extend understanding about our common past to their students. This past year alone, we welcomed over 30,000 students to the museum, subsidizing every single field trip. Last summer, we welcomed 44 teachers like Kristen, Mike, and Rebecca, who came from 29 states to our first ever Teacher Institute. All of this costs money. Those of you here tonight and watching at home are members, the museum trustees, staff, friends, and supporters come from every walk of life imaginable. And because of your help, we are able to hold up a mirror to our past and inspire our future. You'll be pleased to know that we've raised $1.1 million so far. And we hope to raise $100,000 here tonight, bringing our total to $1.2 million and making this our most successful gala in our history so that we can continue teaching and bringing our American history to life. There are pledge cards on your tables, and staff carrying torches are walking around to collect them. For those of you at home, there is a pledge link in the chat. You can continue making pledges all evening long. Please be generous. To start the giving, Meryl and I have each pledged $18,000 or double high for life, in honor of Nicki, Morris, and Clint. Join us and help continue to bring the museum beyond Orchard Street to Americans across the country. I'd like you to know what your help in fact does. $10,000 subsidizes in-person visits to the museum for thousands of K-12 students from New York City and across the country, including students, for example, from Lone Peak High School in Utah, New Utrecht High in Brooklyn, and the Museum School of Arundel Estates in Georgia. $5,000 connects teachers with leading scholars and museum resources through our professional learning opportunities like the Teacher Institute that you've heard about. $2,500 inspires students and teachers to record their own histories in Your Story, Our Story, helping build the library of American life we are amassing. Over the past year alone, more than 4,000 stories were added. $1,500 provides New York City public school students with vouchers to bring their families to the museum free of charge. This year, we gave away 16,000 vouchers. $500 gives New York City public school teachers free Sunday admission. And your gift of any size creates teacher lesson plans to extend our tenement stories into their classrooms. These were downloaded over 9,000 times this year. When you support the Tenement Museum, your help guarantees our country's connection to our past and reinforces our shared stake in our American future. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your generosity.
Hello. What a grand and glorious moment. I regret I am not able to join you in New York today, but I'm glad all of you could be there to enjoy this wonderful Tenement Museum Gala. The Tenement Museum graphically captures the lives of people who are often left out of history books because their stories were considered inconsequential. Cultural institutions and historians are obligated to try to fill these voids of understanding and recognition, something I instinctively understood as a child. One of my first memories was sitting on my grandfather's knee, looking at a book as he read it to me. He pointed to a picture of 19th century classroom captioned unidentified school children. He told me that these kids likely were no longer alive and said, "What a shame that people could live their lives, die, and simply be forgotten." Illuminating these unsung lives has remained central to my notion of what a historian should focus on. Not just the political figures, newsmakers, and celebrities, but the quiet heroes and the people who leave a lasting impact by making their communities better. Today's recipient of the Gina Manuel Award does just that. Clint Smith makes history accessible, takes the complicated and makes it digestible. His work is more critical than ever, especially as attempts to sand down the rough edges of our history that really increases nationwide. I think of Clint's anecdote in his brilliant book, How the Word is Passed, about touring Monticello and encountering two white women who expressed shock that Thomas Jefferson owned enslaved people and that Monticello was built by them. To a historian, not knowing that Jefferson owned slaves and fathered children with Sally Hemings is hard to grasp. But it's a stark reminder that many people have limited historical knowledge, and it is our job to continue to battle misinformation and ignorance. Clint does so with his insightful writing, his enthusiastic engagement with students and teachers, and his gift for spurring national conversations about our complex past and how to find a better shared future. I had the good fortune to get to know Cliff over the last couple of years. It is fitting that he receives this award, named for Gina Manuel, who was also a champion for the full telling of history. In a 1989 letter to the Tenement Museum's curator, Ruth Abrams, she wrote about how meaningful it would be to see stories from the perspective of the African Americans who had lived in the tenements, including her own family. They did laundry, swept chimneys, laid bricks, tarred roofs, served in the army, and all deserve to be remembered. Their spirits walk these halls, and their bones lay in the earth there, and we should remember them. In How the Word is Passed, Clint also touched on how transformative that kind of personal connection to the past can be. A visit to the National Museum of African American History and Culture with his grandparents led to his grandmother's simple observation, "I lived it." As he noted, my grandparents' stories are in my inheritance. Each one is an heirloom I carry. We each carry these heirlooms. Historians like Clint and institutions like the Tenement Museum reveal the unbroken filament that connects our ancestors to our descendants. By using scholarship and education and history and culture to pass the word about what came before, honestly and transparently, we enrich ourselves, our communities, and our world. Clint, congratulations on this well-deserved award.
I think you have some fans here tonight.
A few. They're biased.
I want to also note that the letter that Gina Manuel wrote to Ruth Abram is on the screen, or should be on the screen shortly. And we've been learning more and more about Gina Manuel. And I need to acknowledge that here tonight is a good friend of Gina Manuel, Ruthine Robinson, and her friend Joan Tyson. And they are with Marquise Taylor. And Marquise found them through his research, and through that research, we have found more about Gina Manuel. And you can see in the picture, Gina Manuel is a little girl next to her great-grandmother, Parthenia Lawrence. And Parthenia Lawrence lived, as it turned out, in the same building complex as Joseph and Rachel Moore, whose stories we tell at the Tenement Museum. So an amazing kind of circle back to what we're doing and to the stories that you tell. But I want to ask you about your family, many of whom are here tonight, and some of whom might even be watching on TV tonight, right? So we have 4 generations of Smiths. So thank you, Clint's parents, for being here. Thank you, Ariel, for being here. It's wonderful. Sorry, here you go. That's it. And thank you also for your grandparents who are watching on live stream. And also thank you to the Atlantic family who's here in support of Clint. So your whole book is very moving, but the chapter that I love the most is actually the epilogue, in which you take your grandparents to the National Museum of African American History and Culture that Lonnie Bunch had created. Do you mind telling us a little bit about what happened to you at that museum?
Yeah, so I wrote this book, How the Word is Passed, where I explored how different places across the country reckoned with or failed to reckon with their relationship to the history of slavery. And I had this remarkable sort of 4 or 5 year experience where I traveled across the country, I traveled across the world, asking people about their family histories, asking people about these deep, intimate stories of their lives. And kind of 4 years into the project, I realized that I'd spent so much time asking strangers to tell me these intimate stories of their lives, and I had never asked people in my own family the same types of questions that I had asked these people that I would never meet again. And so I thought about that one day when I was visiting the National Museum of African American History and Culture with my grandparents, and I remember pushing my grandfather in his wheelchair. He was born in 1930 Jim Crow, Mississippi, and my grandmother born in 1939 Jim Crow, Florida. And we're walking through the museum. My grandfather's in the wheelchair, his cane is laid across his lap. And my grandmother's walking a few paces ahead of us. And I have this moment where I'm watching them look at the exhibits that are in this museum. And I realize that so many of the things that are documented in the museum are things that they experience firsthand. And when I asked my grandmother about it later, she had this refrain. She kept saying, "I lived it. I lived it. I lived it." And it made me think about how the first person to open the National Museum of African American History and Culture was a woman named Ruth Bonner. And Ruth Bonner sort of rang the bell alongside the Obama family to signal the opening of this museum. And she was the daughter of an enslaved person, not the granddaughter, not the great-granddaughter. Like, the woman who opened the National Museum of African American History and Culture was the daughter of a man who was born into slavery. You know, my grandfather's grandfather was enslaved. So when my young children sit on my grandfather's lap, I imagine my grandfather sitting on his grandfather's lap. And I'm reminded that this history we tell ourselves was a long time ago, just wasn't that long ago at all. We talk about slavery like it's something that happened in the Jurassic period. Like it was the dinosaurs, the Flintstones, and slavery all at the same time. But it was such a reminder for me that this history, we're so proximate to this history. I tell people the story, like I went to England a few years ago, and I got a tour at Oxford University. It's very, everybody knows this prestigious university in the UK. And we were on this tour, and the tour guide was telling us about all the different people who walked these hallowed halls and who worked in each of these buildings. And he'd come to one building and he'd be like, this great poet wrote this poem in this building. And this great scientist conducted this experiment in this building. And this great philosopher wrote this essay in this building. And he came to one building and he looked at the building and looked at us, looked at the building and looked at us. And he was like, this building was built around 1020. And I was like AM or PM? Like I couldn't even conceive of the idea that he was talking about a building that had been built a millennium ago, right? That like people were walking in and out of. But it was such an important reminder for me that the US is so young and our history is so young relative to the rest of the world. We're like the annoying preteen of the world, increasingly so these days. Yes. But it's just, I think it's an important reminder because it's helpful to remember how close we are to this history, not only to the history of slavery, but as exemplified in the Tenement Museum, how close we are to the history of the folks who lived in these spaces. And in my work, so much of what I think about is putting your body in the place where history happened. And when I walk through the Tenement Museum, what I feel is the spirits and the sort of the texture of who these people were. You can see it in their items. You can touch the same things they taught. You walk across the same creaking floorboards that they did. You can touch the same walls and see the sun shine through the same window in the way that it did when they were there, 60, 70, 100, 120 years ago. And I think that that's so powerful, and that's why it has such a singular impact on students, because they are feeling the sort of dynamism of having their body and making themselves proximate to that history in that way.
And some of those students that you toured with are here tonight again. So again, a shout out to the Gateway School up there.
Out on a school night. All right.
Out on a school night. It's like prom. The Tenement Museum Gala is the new prom.
This is the new prom.
But to that point about proximity and putting yourself in the place where history happened, we're all in New York City right now. In a book about slavery, why was it important to include New York? And what did you feel about having New York be a chapter in your book?
I mean, the tricky part about writing a book about the history of slavery in America is that, I wrote about 8 places. I could have written about 1,008, right? Like the story of slavery is etched into the landscape of the city. It's the scars that are embedded in the ground across this country. But it felt important to me to make sure that I was including a place that was outside of the North, that was outside of people's traditional conception of what and where slavery was and what it took place and what the dynamics of it were. And also, for me, so much of what I do in my work is kind of chase my own curiosity. So I was vaguely aware that there had been slavery in New York. I knew it existed, but I didn't have a meaningful sense of what that was. And so what I try to do in my work is to sort of use myself as a stand-in for the reader to say, maybe I've heard about slavery in New York, but I couldn't really tell you anything meaningful about it. And so I had the good fortune to spend time here and go on a tour of the history of slavery in New York and talk to so many historians and researchers and to understand that New York, at one point was the second largest slave market in the country, only after Charleston, South Carolina, that the New York infrastructure, the economic, social infrastructure of the city was so deeply entangled in the slaveocracy of the South that in 1861, the mayor of New York City, Fernando Wood, actually proposed that that New York City secede from the Union alongside with the Confederate States because it was so economically, again, entangled in what was happening in the South. And I think that I certainly didn't know that. And I think that people can take for granted both not only the extent to which slavery existed here on its own terms, but the extent to which it facilitated and made possible the existence of slavery through its financial institutions, through insurance companies, so many of which are based here in the city.
And I love the part about the Statue of Liberty, which you share was originally conceived of to mark the end of slavery.
Which was remarkable to me. Again, it's so many books for me are just an excuse to like teach myself things I didn't know. And so I have these moments of revelation where I got introduced to the fact that the Statue of Liberty was, what I thought and what I had been taught my whole life is that the Statue of Liberty was something that, was meant to represent immigration, and it was sort of coexisted alongside Ellis Island to welcome new immigrants to the United States, and was a symbol of liberty in that sense, and had no notion of it being something that was originally conceived of as a gift from the French after the end of the Civil War to celebrate the abolition of slavery, to celebrate the 13th Amendment, to celebrate the United States more fully coming into the fraternity of brotherhood, as the French would put it, by nature of the fact that now 4 million enslaved black people in this country were free. But this was all happening in a moment where there was still so much, the Civil War just ended. There was so much anger, so much resentment, so much contention. And the original design of the Statue of Liberty, as you said, because it was meant to celebrate and commemorate the abolition of slavery, instead of having a booklet in her hand, Lady Liberty had a pair of broken chains, broken shackles. And they changed it because so many people were upset with the idea that the largest, at that time would have been the largest statue in the world, would be such a prominent emblem of emancipation, something that half the country didn't want, maybe more than half the country, depending on how you count. And so eventually they changed the design and replaced the chains in her hand with the tablet. And what they did was they didn't get rid of the chains completely, they moved the chains below her feet, but they're kind of sneaking under her robe. And when you're standing next to the Statue of Liberty, you can't tell when you look at it. And in the book, I talk about how I have this moment where I'm standing next to the Statue of Liberty and I'm standing next to her feet, but I can't see it because the base is so big. And I'm standing next to the chains that were removed from her hands and brought down to her feet, but I don't know that they're there. And I think it's this sort of eerily apt metaphor about how the history of slavery is so often right next to us, standing right next to us, even though we can't always see it.
And that's why the power of your work is so important, because once you know that the chains are there, then you're able to see them. There's a beautiful moment as you're, on the ferry leaving, and that you said you see them. But again, maybe it's because you just learned that they were there. But it speaks to the importance of history. If we teach the things that we know in all of its complexity, in all of the layers, we become more complex and better able to deal with complexity today. And I think the other thing about the Statue of Liberty, too, is that even though it's associated today with immigration, when it was first installed, it wasn't connected to immigration. So that was something that took time. So all of these layers of history connected to the Statue of Liberty. You're working now on a book of World War II, and I don't want to give it away. The Allies won. But I know, too, that your great uncle served in the war. Yeah. And I'm just curious I know the book isn't coming out quite yet, and of course we'll invite you to do a talk.
May 2027. My editor's here. She's like, please say it.
And the first party is going to be at the Tenement Museum?
I think we just announced it. There we go.
That's it. But do you want to say something? Is there anything that you want to say about this work on?
Yeah, so I again, for me, I'm less interested in writing books that in which I begin as a sort of purported expert on the subject. Like How the Word Is Passed was never going to be like, here are the 10 things you should have always known about slavery, because that's I'm not interested in writing a polemic. I'm not interested in writing didactic or preachy texts, or I'm trying to write texts that are also authentic to the way that I experience the world, and the way that I experience the world is in again chasing my curiosities. And so, when I watched the statues come down in New Orleans in 2017, all these Confederate statues, I realized that I didn't actually understand the history of slavery in a way that was commensurate to the impact and legacy that it left on this country, despite the fact that I grew up in a city that was the heart of the domestic slave trade, and that I was the descendant of enslaved people, right? Again, like my grandfather's grandfather was enslaved. And so the book was an attempt and a sort of excuse for me to travel across the world and fill in the gaps of my own misunderstandings to try to get a clearer sense of what that story was, and hopefully the idea is to bring the reader on this journey alongside me. And so I take a similar conceit to this newest project, because after How the Word Is Passed came out, I remember I was on book tour, and I was traveling around, and some of the places that I go in How the Word Is Passed, I go to a Confederate cemetery, or I go to Angola prison, and I go to places that are honestly confronting the history of slavery, but I also go to several places that are not honestly confronting their relationship to that history at all. And one of the things people would say on the book tours, they were like, oh yeah, like Germany, they do a really excellent job confronting their history, and the US does a terrible job, and we should be more like Germany. And I started sort of parroting the things that other people were saying, and I was like, yeah, we should be more like Germany, and we should do this, and we should, and I was like, I've never been to Berlin. Like, what am I talking, and so it felt incumbent upon me to go, and when I went, when I pitched it to my editors at The Atlantic, and I went to start reporting on a story about how Germany memorializes the Holocaust. This is in 2021 and 2022. And when I was there, it just became clear that this same idea of like putting your body in the place where history happened was so transformative for me. I will always remember walking into Dachau, and it was the first concentration camp I'd ever been to. And I remember walking in these heavy black iron gates, gravel crunching beneath your feet. You look to your left and you see the remnants of the gas chamber where people were killed. You look to your right, you see the remnants of the crematorium where people's bodies were burned. You look in front of you and you see the sort of skeletons of the barracks where thousands and thousands of people were crowded into these rooms before they eventually died. And I've been to so many places, that carry this history of death, that carry a history of atrocity, that carry a history of trauma. And although I had read all these books about the history of the Holocaust, it wasn't like standing there, right? And it wasn't like walking across the train platform from which Jewish people were sent to the camps. It wasn't like walking through the memorial to the murdered Jews of Europe in this massive, 200,000 square foot memorial in the heart of downtown Berlin. And it was impossible for me to not imagine what it would be like if in the United States, like if in the middle of Manhattan, you had a 200,000 square foot monument to the enslaved people or the indigenous people who had been killed. And so I got really interested in part of what it illuminated for me too is this idea that so much of the story that I had been told about World War II was like by Tom Hanks and Steven Spielberg, who were great. Like shout out to Tom Hanks. But the Saving Private Ryan and Band of Brothers story is only one part of the story. And so what happened when I went to Germany is I was like, oh, I don't understand World War II to the extent that I thought I did, and not just in Germany, but across the world, and even within my own country. So ultimately, I come back to America and I spend time with the Navajo code talkers in New Mexico. I spend time with the people who were held in Japanese American incarceration camps in California. I go abroad and I spend time with atomic bomb survivors in Nagasaki. I spend time with women who were forced into sex slavery by the Japanese military in Korea. I go back to Germany. I go to Argentina and chase the shadows of the people who fled to South America after the war, the Nazis who fled to South America after the war to try to run from their crimes. And I spent time with a 100-year-old World War II veteran who's sort of recounting these stories, and I'm putting his story in conversation with the story of my Uncle Lawrence. And for me, it has been such a remarkable experience because I think about this essay that W.E.B. Du Bois has. And he wrote this essay in 1955 about a trip to Warsaw that he took. So W.E.B. Du Bois is the sort of preeminent black scholar of the 20th century. And he writes about how for so much of his life he had focused sort of singularly on the experiences of anti-black racism and colonialism. And because he is, as a black person, that is the thing that was closest to his heart, to his spirit, to his lineage, his ancestry. And then he went to Warsaw, and he walked across the land of the former Warsaw Ghetto, and he saw the monument to the Warsaw Uprising. And he remembers, in his own way, the gravel crunching beneath his feet when he was standing there. And he talked about how that experience stripped him of what he calls a social provincialism, that it made him understand the interconnectedness of anti-Semitism in Europe and anti-Black racism in America, and made him more fully understand the extent to which all of these manifestations of violence and oppression are part of the same sort of central systems of power and greed and racism. And I resonated so much with that essay because I feel like that's so much of what I experience. So much of what's happened for me over the past few years of working on this book is getting a clearer sense of the interconnectedness of our stories, of our common humanity, how, you know, so much of the way that America tries to sidestep so much of its history is not so dissimilar to the way that Japan tries to sidestep some of its history as it relates to Korea, as it relates to China. And going to places and, you know, talking to atomic bomb survivors in Nagasaki who have used their experience of being these victims of the atomic bomb to try and advocate for a world in which there are no more nuclear weapons. And when people push them and say, how can, you know, do you think it's realistic to try to abolish nuclear weapons? And one of the things they told me, I'll always remember, they were like, well, at some point, somebody told enslaved people that it was impossible to abolish slavery. But they did it anyway. And they tried, and they tried, and they tried. And so to go to these places and to see the ways in which, like, communities in Nagasaki, Japan, or in Seoul, Korea are putting their experiences and their lives in conversation with my own ancestors and my experience and my community. Again, it revealed the sort of common humanity that we all share, and it taught me so much.
And yet the way that you teach, going into the details and bringing it to life for so many people, and not just talking about the history, but talking about the way it's taught. That is what I think is so exciting about how the word is passed, and what this book about World War II is going to be just as illuminating. And you should know, and I'm sure you're not surprised, that at the Teachers Institute, Clint is like the rock star. And the teachers line, some teachers showed up, they already had t-shirts that had his name on it. And at every book talk we do, there are teachers that do show up, and it's like the fan club. It is amazing, but you can obviously see why that is the case. And I know that somewhere Gina Manuel is watching this, and she is so overjoyed. Thank you so much for your work. Thank you. So I think we have one last thing to do before dessert. I saw Susan Slechtor get very upset. I think I have a friend who's here to bring me something. No? Okay. So Ian, maybe Ian wants to bring me something.
All right, we've got some exciting news. Thank you, Maddie, for giving this to us, sharing the good news. Thanks, Maddie. Hi, everyone. Annie.
Wait, does everyone know who this is?
We don't need to do this. Hi.
This is Ian Patrick, who you've all been in touch with.
You've received so many emails from me. I make the same joke every year, but it's true. So, thank you for bearing with me, and thank you for being here and all you do for the Tenement Museum.
So the news that Madeline has brought me and the news that Ian has brought me, that tonight in this room, all of you have made this the most successful gala the Tenement Museum has ever had. In this room, we had hoped to raise $100,000. We raised $125,000. So thank you so much. And there is now dessert, so please enjoy. And thank you to the amazing staff, Chelsea, Ian, Liddy, Melissa, and Emma, and everyone at the Tenement Museum. Thank you so much.